Hi, this is Adolph Oliver, and in this video we're going to be talking about finding the slope from an equation. Now, it turns out that if you have the equation, there's a real simple way of finding the slope. You solve it for y equals, and here's the secret we have to tell you. When you have the equation in the y equals form, then it looks like this. Whatever is in front of the x is the slope. Now, we've used the letter M before. It's the letter that's used in math to indicate slope. And the B here is the y-intercept. Now, we'll be able to use this information to graph equations easily in the future. But for the time being, what we want to do is simply come up with the slope. So if you were lucky enough to get an equation, say it was like this, y equals 3x minus 2, already in the y equals form, well, you'd say, hey, the slope is just the guy in front of the x. This coefficient happens to be positive 3, and the y-intercept, where it crosses the y-axis, is this guy right here, what's known as the b. So here's a form that you're going to make use of in the future for grafting. Y equals mx plus b, but what we're going to do at the time being is just practice using it to be able to come up with what the slope of the equation is. Now, most of the time you're going to have to clean up the equation yourself to get it in the y equals form. Here's an example right here. 3 minus y equals negative 4x. Well, we want to get this in the y equals form, so we have to do a little cleaning. This is officially a plus 3 here, since we don't see the sign. We assume it to be positive. We jump it over here, it comes over as a negative 3. So I have negative y equals negative 4x. The negative 3 is a plain number, so it has to exist just by itself. Now we're getting close, but we're not there yet. Okay, we want to have the equation be in y equals, not the negative y equals, because here we'd be telling folks the opposite of everything. So remember, if you have a minus in front of your y, then what you simply do is, since this is officially negative 1 times y, divide everybody, each and every term in both sides, by negative 1. The minus 1's cancel out here, and we get y equals. Now notice, 2 minuses here combine to give me a plus. I'll put the plus to rub it in. There we go. And same thing over here. 2 minuses give me a plus. So here it is. We now have it officially in the y equals form. And whatever's in front of the x is the m. That's the slope. And of course, this guy out here is the y-intercept. We'll mention that also. Well, let's look at some more examples of this. Here's one right here where we've got some fractions that need to be cleaned up. Well, here's a way you can proceed on this one. What I'm going to do is, since the y is on the wrong side, I could subtract it over and come with a minus, but I'm just going to play another trick that's good for us, and that is we can simply always interchange the sides of the two equations, and if you do that, you don't change any of the signs. In other words, if you take the whole right side, move it to the left, whole left side, move it to the right, everybody stays exactly the way they are. It's only when you jump terms one at a time that you change the sign, but if you jump them all, nothing changes. Well, why do we want to do this? Because now what we do is we want to start cleaning up the left here and get it just to y equals. So the plus 3, I turn around and move that over here as negative 3. So if I rewrite this, I've got 3 halves y equals 3 halves x minus 3. Okay, now, what's the easiest way to turn this coefficient, 3 halves in front of the y, into 1? Multiply it by its reciprocal. Anytime you have a fraction times your variable, it's just on one side like this, then we can turn around and multiply by the reciprocal. But we have to hit every term in the other side by it as well. To keep everything in balance, you got to treat every term the same. So over on this side, notice I've taken and multiplied both the terms here by the reciprocal of 3/2, which is 2/3. Now, here's what happens. The 2's cross cancel, the 3's cross cancel, so we end up with just y equals. Now, in this particular problem, looks like the 3's and the 2's cross cancel over here, so we end up with just x. And over here, I can make a fraction out of my -3 by putting a 1 underneath it. That reminds me who's on top and who's on the bottom here. So I can cancel the 3's out here as well. I have 1 times 1 on the bottom, so the answer is just the top. 1 times 1 times 2, and the negative sign is -2. Okay, well, I've got it in y equals form. I'm all ready to indicate what the slope and even the y-intercept is. And notice there's no coefficient in front of the x, so we assume the sign to be positive, and we can also put a 1 there. So anytime you have a variable all by itself, you can always put a +1 in front of it. That's what we assume. That being the case, since it's in y equals form, this +1 is the slope, the m value, and the -2 is the y-intercept. Well, it's the slope that we're interested in a moment here, so this is +1. Well, as we see, it oftentimes takes a little bit of cleaning up to solve these guys. So here's another one where we have to do some cleaning up. Let's go ahead and work on it and see what we've got here. First thing I'm going to do on this is I'm going to interchange the two sides. So let's see how we're done here. I'm going to, well, actually, take a look at this. The y has a -3 coefficient in front of it. So I'd like to get it over here as +3. So here's a case where instead of interchanging the sides, what I'm going to do instead is just jump this single term over. Now, why did I decide to do that? Well, I always want to get the y over here with a plus in front of it. And so since it was here with a minus, if I jump it by itself, it'll now become +3y. And then on the right side, I still have -x. Okay, and of course, -12. Okay, well now I can turn around and divide every side by 3. Since this is 3 times y, I'm going to divide, and I have to hit each and every term. One term on the left, the y, and the 2 terms on the right. I hit each one of them. Now, the 3's cancel out, so I get y equals. Now, there's no number in front of this x right here, but I can put a 1 between the minus sign and it and just say this is -1x. And if that's the case, I can write the fraction here as -1/3 and just put the x behind it. You can hit the x behind it, or you can have it up top. Either way, it's your choice. This way, by putting it behind it, we isolate the fraction nicely. Now, -12 divided by 3 is 4. So here we are. We've got it in the y equals form. Okay, turn around and identify this as the slope, the m value, and of course this is the y-intercept that we'll be using in the future. So once again, anytime you have an equation, very easy to get the slope. Solve it in the y equals form. This may take a little bit of cleaning up, but once you get it in the y equals form, whatever the coefficient is in front of the x, that's your slope. Well now, let's remind you again what happens when you have one of the variables missing. Okay, this one right here doesn't have any y. And we're, of course, considering this to be an equation that we're going to graft on an xy graft. So that being the case, you don't need any of the special techniques. Just think about how you would graph this. The one thing I would do on this is a -1/3 times the x. I would turn around to solve for x here. And when you use a reciprocal, you flip the fraction, but you keep the sign. So this would be -3/1. times x, and of course I'd have to multiply this side by the same thing over here. So I had negative 1/3 x. I decided to change that into plus 1x, and so I hit it with the reciprocal. Sign stays the same, just flip the fraction. So notice the 3's cross cancel. I end up with 1/1. The two minus signs give me a plus. So officially, I'll write it down here. This is a plus 1x equals. Now over on the right, you can make a fraction out of that initial 1 by putting a 1 underneath it. And so that reminds you that I just had 1 times 1 downstairs, so that means the answer is just the upstairs. 1 times negative 3 is negative 3, or simply x equals negative 3. Now, what's that tell us about the slope? Well, make yourself a little xy grid over here. Okay, here we go, x and y. Now, all we have is this requirement that x equals negative 3. Y is not mentioned, so they don't care what y is. So where would x equals negative 3 be? Well, negative 1, negative 2, negative 3 right here. And I would draw a line perpendicular at that point and just double check, is it true that every point on this line has x equals negative 3? In other words, it's negative 3 to the left. That's true. Well, just look at the slope of this line. This is a vertical line. Okay, so vertical line means the slope is infinity, or you can say it's undefined. This is the easiest way to handle these guys that have a variable missing. Just think about how they graph, and you sometimes have to clean them up a little bit to do that. But then again, if it's a vertical line, m equals infinity. If it's a horizontal line, m equals 0. Well, let's look at one last example of this. Here's one again where one of the variables is missing. And so what we're simply going to do here is turn around and solve this for y equals. So since this is 2 times y, I'll divide both sides by 2. So I get y equals. Now for graphing purposes, it's nice to always take an improper fraction and change it to a mixed number. 2 goes into 5 twice, and there's 1 part left over, so 2.5 would be what it is as a mixed number. Okay, here we go again. Let's make our xy graph here, x and y. We want y to be 2.5. Well, here's y equals 1, y equals 2, y equals 3, so y equals 2.5 would be between 2 and 3. And again, we simply draw a line perpendicular to the axis at that point, and we double check it by asking ourselves, is it true that every point on this line has y equals 2.5? In other words, it's 2.5 up, and that's true. Since x is not mentioned, x can be anything. Well, there's what it would graph like, and of course this is a horizontal line. And one of the things we know about horizontal lines, okay, is that they have a 0 slope. So since it's horizontal, the slope equals 0, okay, meaning it's a flat line. Remember, all lines that are flat, wherever they are grafted like this, it means that the slope is 0.